How's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
Good. I think this is the first time we're seeing each other since December, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When was it? The 19th?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Yeah. We talked a little bit on the Discord over voice, but yeah, it's the first time we're having face to face. So cool. I like the shirt.
Thank you.
Like I was telling you before. Is that one of the ones you made, or is that one that you bought?
Um, that was one that I bought uh last time I was in Savannah for the last meeting.
I was kind of wondering what your perspective of that event was. If you want to talk a little bit about kind of the
Yeah.
circumstances we met under and what this event was that we met at, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was the meet and greet with Sawyer and Kathy at the Graveface Museum before all of the day's festivities that weekend. And they ended up being all day and night. I think it was like 12 hours from like the meet and greet to like
Mhm.
the time that we all left anyway.
Before we get too into it, do you want to tell us like who are Kathy and Sawyer?
Um, Sawyer, as he's known primarily, is the longest running and believing member of Heaven's Gate that's still in their vehicle today that I know of. I believe he was with the class for 19 years from like 1975 until 94, I believe. One of the longest running members that was in the class at all. Um, but yeah, his partner Kathy's new believer, I guess. I still don't know exactly what terminology they refer to use on that, but Kathy and Sawyer have been traveling together for a while, over a year, maybe 2 years. Um, and Kathy's been involved ever since then, year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And they live stream and sell books and things of that nature. Sawyer's in all the documentaries for the most part too. Any of the like big name documentaries you see, they always talk to him.
So what is Heaven's Gate in your words?
It's hard to say. I have had it a couple times that I've had to try to explain it to people that didn't know anything about the group at all, like didn't even know of, the common aspects of it. To me, it's sort of a continuation of the Bible in a sense, or elaborating on the Bible. T and Do came from the next level, the evolutionary level above human. And we're trying to teach anyone that would listen how they could go there themselves whenever their vehicle expires. And over the time, they started to gather some followers, even though they weren't really too keen on the idea. But to me personally, whenever I first saw it, it's very Christ-like. I think, like biblically Christ-like, more than a lot of
Mhm.
people know.
That's definitely on more of like the academic side, like in a lot of like Zeller's writings on Heaven's Gate. Benjamin Zeller, who wrote what is it, America's UFO Religion, I think is the
Yeah,
name of the book. He's talked about that a lot, that it is a very Christian and heavily Christian influenced
yeah,
belief system, um, in more of like the popular conception of the group. I agree. I think that aspect is probably not as centered.
yeah. I mean,
You
you
know,
hardly ever hear it mentioned at all, pretty much in anything that you read or watch. It's like people definitely don't want to call them a Christian group, which they didn't want to be called one either. But
when you mention T and Do, we're talking about Bonnie Nettles and Marshall Applewhite,
yeah,
respectively, right?
yeah,
The two founders of Heaven's Gate. And T and Do was those were the names that they went by. So one of several names, I guess, that they went by. Do you remember any of the other names that they went by? They had a few different monikers that they used.
Another one they used for a long time was Bo and Peep. That
Right.
they were using that whenever they first started having public meetings around mid 70s. And in the Inside Heaven's Gate book, or UFO Missionaries Extraordinaire by Brad Steiger and Hayden Hughes, they're called Bo and Peep in all those interviews. So that was an early one. A lot of the other ones were silly in a way, like sing-songy names, and I can't remember any of the other ones besides Bo and Peep off the top of my head. T
Mhm.
and Doe. They were called the Two for a period of time, and I don't know what they referred to themselves by name as during that time, but they went through a lot, as did the group. They constantly changed names.
You mentioned that they didn't really want followers. They were a little bit ambivalent about getting a following, so to speak, but they
Yeah.
still wanted to get this message out there to people.
Mm.
Would you say that this wanting to use names other than the ones that they were given at birth is part of that, like trying to kind of separate their message from their personalities in a way?
Um, yes, because I mean part of the concept of the teachings themselves was to sort of distance yourself from your human life. So to
Mhm.
them also it was, we've stepped away from our former life, we're using another name, etc. So I do think it was definitely a bit of distancing themselves in it one way or another for whatever reason they chose.
Do you know why they settled on T and Doe at all? I know
Yeah,
there's a few different theories. I was wondering what your thoughts
yeah.
on it.
One of the main ones I've heard was that, of course, the sound of music that comes up a lot. Um, T really loved the sound of music from the before she joined the group, and then still even in the group, she loved Sound of Music. And from what I understand, they watched it a lot. But in one of the one song, I can't remember the name of it, but it's, you know, do re mi, and it goes up and up the line. And I'd also been reading in Sawyer's book how T compared the steps of like a piano roll to like going through the levels in the class, so to speak. And then T and Do are directly beside of each other. T comes before Do, so that was part of the rationalizing to it.
That first question I asked you is, I think, one of the hardest to answer. Like, what is Heaven's Gate? And I think one of the reasons is because
Yeah,
the beliefs and like customs that the group would end up using borrowed from like so many different places. Like it borrowed a lot from the Gospels and the Book of Revelations. They borrowed a little bit from some New Age stuff, although that in itself is kind of a broad term too.
yeah,
Um, they borrowed from obviously UFO kind of mythology, but the other things that they borrowed from was just like personal things that they liked, like the Star Trek references, the Sound of
yeah,
Music stuff. A lot of it was just very like contingent on their own personal kind of things that they found they liked. You mentioned people who are interested or initiated. What would you say there's a difference between someone who's just interested in Heaven's Gate and someone who is actually a believer in the teachings? And
um I mean, it's not really necessarily my place to say, and
Mhm.
I don't know of too many people that at least outwardly claim to believe it. There's not really a group or anything. It's kind of just scattered people around. A lot of them are former members that were in the class at one point or another, and then there's some less people afterwards that have heard it and dedicated to it. But um, I mean, I think sometimes there's a thin line between interest and being involved in one way or another, because this is sort of, with the way the beliefs are set up with the next level and everything, it people could be just doing their part, so to speak, by doing academic research or you know, people looking for details, and even like Benjamin Zeller and people who sort of speak against it can sort of be doing their own part in the plan, so to speak. So I mean, it just depends on what people decide to do with the information and how strongly they feel about it. Because I myself went from just being interested in the specifics and these things to feeling stronger and stronger about it over time.
One thing that I've noticed with you and with Sawyer and Kathy that I think I've said I really find endearing
Mhm.
is there is a lot of reticence to speak out of turn. Like there's a lot of like I think one of the most common phrases I heard you guys use when we met in December is well, I could be wrong, but well, I'm
Yeah,
not too sure, but and I just thought that was really cool. And I think I talked to Kathy about that at length. That it's so different from my my little milieu of philosophers and stuff. That's not a phrase you often hear. I could
right.
be wrong.
Yeah.
Um, so maybe a better question would be, how would you identify yourself? Are you a Heaven's Gate believer? Are you just interested from a curiosity standpoint, or
I mean,
no?
I believe that T and Doe are what they said they were. And I believe in the message that they taught because I've applied it in my own life. And the more I do choose to apply it, the more I see that it is what I want to follow. Um, I there's not really a specific term for it because all the terms with this are kind of weird because there's former members, but they a lot of them still believe, and nobody's really decided on a term. But I guess like new believer is what I generally say whenever I have to put a title on it.
What about in keeping with the Star Trek theme? What about the Next Generation?
That's pretty good, honestly. If there was another class or group, that would be genius. I never thought about that.
What was your kind of journey like to wherever it is that you are now in relation to the teachings of Tiendo and Heaven's Gate? How did that come about? Because presumably this wasn't something you were born into.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, no, I mean, in a way I was sort of born into it because I was born a couple years before the suicides took place. So like my entire vehicular life growing up, I'd heard about the story, and I've always been really into documentaries in general, and I'd always seen a lot of various stuff like that about it. But one of the big things for me, I was always fairly open about trying different things or hearing out other viewpoints, whether it was religious or whatever. And at the time, I'd been doing a lot of soul searching, so to speak, and I was really into a lot of Gnostic principles and reading stuff like that at the time. And I watched something that had Sawyer in it and a couple of other people that are still with us in vehicle, and I thought that's wild that based on what you've heard this is and the story you've heard, there's still people that are alive that still believe it. And I guess that was, to a lot of people, that's their first like step into being really interested in one way or another, is realizing that there's still people alive that believe in it. And at that point I thought I wanted to know why, what they were looking at, or what they believed, that regardless of what happened in the story, so to speak, they still believe in it so strongly and so like honestly, I guess. Like to watch Sawyer and people like that, like you can tell that they believe in what they're saying. And I was just really interested and started looking into it more at that point. And I started watching Beyond Human, the tape series that they did. They're like 45 minutes to an hour long.
Those are
Uh,
the tapes that the group made themselves, right?
yeah. Yeah. Um, it was either late 80s or early 90s they came out, and I think there's 8 or 9 tapes. They were the big introduction for me because a lot of people have seen clips from the planet Earth about to be recycled and things like that are sort of later in the story. But not a lot of people had seen Beyond Human, and I watched it and I was like, this is reasonable enough. I didn't know if they really believed this at all. It was my first time hearing what they believed, and I really felt like I connected with the message pretty immediately, and that sort of turned into a what's the word? At least like more sympathetic view of the class and the people that were involved with the group, because I saw it and I was like, wow, this doesn't sound crazy. This doesn't sound as far out as everybody makes it out to be. The Beyond Human series also deals with a lot of talking about God, Jesus, etc., and how those terms correlate to the next level and their understanding of it. And I was just blown away by what I'd heard. And I kept watching Beyond Human, listening to different things, trying to learn directly from them instead of just documentaries and things. And sympathy grew to respect and adoration, I guess, so to speak. And then the more I listened to T and Doe, especially Doe, because that's what most of the public recordings consist of.
Mhm.
One day I was thinking to myself, and I thought, I don't see any reason why this seemingly man and woman, I don't see any reason why they're not exactly what they say they are from the way that they
What
lived.
what was that? What did they say that they were?
Um, that gets complicated in like
Mhm.
specific terms, and like I definitely would hate to be using the wrong terms. That was something they taught a lot, which I'm still getting in the habit of learning a lot of it. But they were more or less souls that had been sent from the next level that had already graduated from the human level to the evolutionary level above human. And they were souls that were sent to return to instruct people that were still here on Earth in this garden experiment how they could go to the next level themselves.
What exactly is the relationship between Christian teachings and the teachings of Heaven's Gate? Because you've mentioned both of them kind of in conjunction a few
Right.
times.
Well, T and Doe didn't expressly quote the Bible or anything a lot, like directly, like, say a preacher would or something like that. But a lot of the stories and what's the term? Parables that they sort of spoke were directly related to biblical concepts. They both, in their vehicles, grew up in fairly Christian environments. Marshall's father was a preacher, and he had gone through various schooling with the church and stuff of that nature. But the basic belief, as far as I've grown to understand it, is that at some point the Bible, or how people have translated and used the Bible over time, has gone off track, and they were returning in a way to try to remind people of what the actual way to enter heaven was. At one point, they thought that they were literally the two witnesses in the book of Revelation. Um, that was the only time that I know of that they expressly called themselves anything from the Bible, because I don't think they cared very much for saying I'm this or that. Um, it was theorized in later years that the soul that inhabited the body of T was the soul of God the Father, and spiritually, the spirit that was inside of Doe was the same spirit that once inhabited the body of Jesus Christ. But he didn't say like I'm Jesus returned or anything like that. But the teachings overlap a lot, as far as um, kind of monastic lifestyle, abstinence, sobriety, not to have too much connection to any of your physical things, um, belongings, houses. They were on the move a lot, sort of nomadic lifestyle. They were trying to bring a return to the gospel teachings. They had said that specifically the words of the gospel was preserved intentionally by the next level over time so that it wouldn't be as diluted or destroyed, because it was the actual words of Jesus Christ, an older member. So they held really strongly to those, especially the gospel accounts and revelations, like you said.
Yeah, it seemed like this idea that T was like the spirit of the Abrahamic God, and that Doe was the spirit of Jesus. That seems to kind of come out more like after T's death. Is that off
Yeah.
base? That or
Yeah. I, at least personally, I've never heard any of those conversations happen while T was still in her vehicle. It wasn't, seems like it took a while afterwards for that conversation to start happening. But sometimes
yeah,
I've also heard them say it's maybe not exactly what they mean, that it's the spirit of Jesus Christ, but that relationship in the next level of she is an older member to Doe, and then Doe is an older member to the class of chain of succession, chain of command sort of way the next level operates.
what is the next level in your
Um,
perspective?
well, the next level, hard to say exactly what it is for someone who's never been there, but um, according to T and Doe, the next level is also historically known as Kingdom of God, Kingdom of Heaven, or just simply as Heaven. And it's a many-membered kingdom in the reaches of outer space, from what I understand. It is a physical kingdom with physical members that wear ageless, deathless, genderless bodies. And there are many members thereof. It's not sort of just God and Jesus like a lot of people would imagine it to be. Um, as far as how many members, that's speculative, but many membered physical kingdom, physical heavens.
Yeah, that was something I think Sawyer really stressed at the first event that I'm not sure I ever really fully appreciated, which is this idea that the next level, from their understanding, is a physical place somewhere in the universe, but for whatever reason, we just don't have access to it. But it's not like in some
Yeah.
other dimension or something like that, and it's not like ethereal or non-physical at all.
Right.
Um, which is I think a little different from the way probably most people think of like heaven in like the Christian sense. So that seems like a little bit of an expounding on a Christian idea that they're taking and kind of expanding on it. Like
Yeah.
things like, did you find yourself kind of resonating with the extraterrestrial talk, or did you find that
Um,
wasn't such a selling point for you?
well, admittedly at first it was definitely an aspect of it that I've shied away from a bit. Um, at the same time, I do think a lot of the extraterrestrial conversations around the group are misunderstood a lot of the times. Just for instance, as far as UFO sightings or say the Roswell incident or things like that, they don't believe that those creatures were from the next level.
Okay.
In that way. So it's not it's not like worshiping aliens, so to speak, in what we understand of, flying saucers, abduction, etc. Those
So it's not
were
all aliens. Not all aliens are from the
right.
next level.
Well, I mean, it's no, right. That's true. I mean, it's alien to us, but it's not. I debate whether it's alien in the way that a lot of people would understand it when they hear those words. Um, a lot of the times they said that various incidents of UFO sightings, abduction, things like that were Luciferian lower forces that were more or less trying to emulate the next level to try to become like them the Lucifer cast out of the kingdom sort of concept. That's how that translates. And these theoretically these aliens are abducting people for the kind of genetic modification and things that we've seen, in the stories of the past, probing, doing tests on them, so to speak, because they need to regenerate their bodies, whereas the next level doesn't. And so I do think there is a bit of misunderstanding of people thinking that like a UFO you'd see in the sky would be from the next level or something that the class worshipped or something like that.
Yeah, could you explain a little bit about the Luciferian lower force beings or entities or however you want to call them?
I can try from the best of my knowledge. From what I've understood of it, the biblical tale of Lucifer being cast out of heaven. Lucifer, in the biblical account, wanted to be as equal with God or, celebrated in his own right, whatever the case was. And that's not next level behavior, because next level behavior is a lot of crew-mindedness, working as a team, sort of doing your part in a way as you advance and grow. And Lucifer was casted out. As a result, Lucifer has a lot of various means of afflicting humans, whether it's discarnate souls that are here on Earth or extraterrestrial aliens and things that we might see. And there's a lot of conversation in the past 30 years or so about the ancient alien concept of like aliens are the deities we that we're making contact with, and that's a dangerous mindset to them, to the group, because that's kind of Lucifer coming as an angel of the light, or whatever the biblical analogy is of trying to make you think you're doing the right thing, trying to mislead you, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. There's that's like a recurring thing in the Bible,
Yeah.
definitely this idea that nefarious or ill-intentioned forces can masquerade as
Yeah.
benevolent ones. That seems to have carried over into Heaven's Gate kind of thinking.
Yeah.
So ancient aliens, I guess the ideas behind ancient aliens existed probably as long as Heaven's Gate did, because I think
Yeah.
Chariot of Gods probably came out in like the mid 70s. I don't
Hmm.
know. Are you aware if Tina or Doe ever read Chariot of the Gods or were aware of this kind of thinking?
I would say they were probably aware of it, at least, because back in the mid 70s, whenever they did the interview with Brad Steiger and Hagen Hughes, they were at a sort of, it was like Oklahoma City UFO group. They went around to a lot of places like that, people that were at least interested in alien stuff. So I'm sure they probably came in contact with the ancient alien idea. But from what I understand, at that point, they were still fairly Christian on the way they were looking at things, and I don't know what they would have thought of it at the time if they had read it or encountered it. But I'm sure they knew of it. And like that documentary they showed at the first meeting that me and you went to, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was about UFO sightings and things like that. And that was a tape that the group actually watched together, like at their craft, their home. And they were definitely skeptical of all that stuff, though. I mean, I'm sure they thought it was possible, but they were very skeptical at the same time.
You mean the ancient alien kind of hypothesis?
Yeah. Which, I mean, depending on how you look at it, they do also believe that a lot of the technological advancements and various things that happen with Earth even now are in some ways sent from the next level for advancement or testing or this or that or the other. So I mean, there's definitely remnants of the idea. I can see how they sort of line up in some ways.
One of the things I try to stress with people that I found really interesting about the group is there are so many different like entry points. Like the same set of aspects of the group is not going to necessarily attract all the same people. Like there's people that really resonate with the Christian elements that aren't as overt. Some people that are really already interested in UFOs anyway. And combining religion with UFOs just makes sense. And then there's people who just seem to be looking for something, and they might not have any religious background. They might not have any experiences with religion, or they've had experience with so many different religions, and then they somehow land in Heaven's Gate. That's another really common trajectory with some of the original class members, is they tried everything. They tried a little bit of New Age, a little yoga, a little Christianity, and then finally these T and Do people show up, and for whatever reason, that's the one that they stuck with. At least the ones that did stick with it.
That's the way I feel personally too. That's sort of, like I said, I was always pretty open-minded about things like that, and I looked at all kinds of different belief systems and different denominations and different belief systems, and various things. I guess what people would call like magical thinking, stuff like that. Like I said, sort of Christian Gnostic things, various runs with like Buddhism, stuff like that. Read Anton LaVey's stuff whenever I was younger. A little bit of everything. And I did feel like that. I felt like I kind of landed where I was, and T and Do kind of summed a lot of it up in various ways for me. And I don't really know what the singular point was, I guess, that I came to, that I was like, here's what I was looking for. Here's the culmination of everything. But it's really turned out that way for me.
Sounds like it's been more of a process rather than a white light experience that kind of condensed everything into a single moment. Do you know about when this process started for you?
So specifically as it pertains to Heaven's Gate, it was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. It was during COVID. I was staying about kind of away from everything, with my vehicle's grandparents. They needed some help and stuff and needed to stay indoors and everything. So I was there taking care of them. And I'd sort of just been consuming about whatever spiritual material I could get my hands on at the time. And somehow I came to them, and something in my mind, I don't really know what led up to this point, but at some point I was like, what did they actually believe? And started, like I said before, I started watching Beyond Human and saw Sawyer on a documentary on Cult of Cults, which I'd seen him before throughout my life in various other documentaries. And from that point, I started my project Kingdom of Heaven, which was more or less my way of kind of openly being sympathetic to the group and beliefs. And
this is your musical project, right? Kingdom of Heaven.
And I started doing that, and of course I kept watching the material and listening to it and things like that. And eventually it went from an aesthetic choice of using Heaven's Gate stuff to taking it more and more seriously in my own mind, the more I was watching and listening to. And in a sort of twist of fate, I got some t-shirts printed, and that led me over the internet to Ben. He's a Heaven's Gate collector on Instagram that I'm in contact with a lot. He led me to him. He and I talked for a bit, and at some point he told me that he thought that I should contact Sawyer. And that sort of kind of snowball of things that seemed to randomly happen or happen by chance led me to talking to Sawyer. And then pretty much within a year's time of watching Cult of Cults and thinking, you know, wouldn't it be strange to meet this guy? Like, or, I wonder what that guy's really like, within a year's time or something like that. I was in Savannah in December to meet Sawyer for the first time.
What was this event, I guess, in your from your point of view, where
Okay.
you met Sawyer and Kathy in person for the first time, and I met you in person for the first time. Yeah, what was this Heaven's Gate re-examined thing exactly?
Well, there's a museum in Savannah, Georgia called Graveface Museum. It's got a lot of general oddity sort of stuff in it. Sideshow relics and circus memorabilia, serial killer stuff, etc., and cult belongings. And so they had hosted Sawyer and Kathy to have some sort of an event. They only announced it maybe like 2 weeks ahead of time or something like that, whenever they like
I
started
think that's
selling
being
tickets.
generous. I think it was like a
Yeah,
few
like
days.
yeah. Yeah, it was very short for the first one. And I didn't really know what to expect at that one. I don't really know that they did either, but I was really excited. I happened to be not have to work, which was a miracle in itself, honestly. I thought that was a sign I was going in the right direction. And went down to Savannah that morning. They had a meet and greet with Sawyer and Kathy. Um, former member and current believer that they were whatever it was on the flyers, but they had to get together at the museum first in front of the Heaven's Gate collection of stuff that they have there. And I showed up pretty much right at 12, I think. They were just sort of standing around doing kind of question and answer thing. Whenever I got in, I was kind of like starstruck in a way, which I wasn't expecting. I'm usually like pretty casual and calm and stuff around, even musicians and stuff I've been around, but I was kind of starstruck at it and just stood there and listened. People were asking Sawyer questions. Sawyer was looking at some of the Heaven's Gate stuff that they had around on display and was talking about different pieces of it and things like that, talking about his experience in the class. I think some people asked Kathy some questions about how she ended up with Sawyer and, believing and things like that. That was nice. And then at some point you were there, and a lot of people kind of came and went, but me and you, and there was this one other guy that I'd met there, and we all sort of stood there the whole time, or, from the time that we got there, we just stood around and listened to him. And that was about when you and I met, because we went to leave. The rest of the day's events were at a lodge that the museum owns.
Yeah.
I ended up going alone, drove alone, which was kind of a big deal for me, because I'm usually
Mhm.
not the type to drive, even an hour somewhere by myself, but drove all 5 hours by myself.
Do you not like driving or have driving anxiety or something?
Not really. At the time, I had some anxiety about my car because it had been hit and miss. But
Mhm.
I kind of took a chance on it. Really, I sort of, by happenstance or design, I magically happened to be off work for the days that I needed to be to go, and magically was able to get my car sort of in better capability to make it in the first place. And then I kind of had to push myself to, you know, drive that far on my own, because I never had. But I knew I had to go, honestly.
I mean, even without having like anxiety about driving, like five, 6 hours is a hike, especially if you've
Yeah.
never driven that far by yourself before. Clearly, that making this event was something that was important to you.
Mm.
Um, did you have any expectations as you were um, making the trip? Like, did you have an image in your head of what it was going to look like, or were you uh,
Um,
totally free in your mind of any kind of expectations?
I mean, I'm sure I did. I'm sure I did have some sort of expectations going in, and it wasn't really a whole lot different than what I got in that way. I've kind of envisioned the everybody sitting around in chairs, like listening to him and Kathy talk kind of thing. Didn't know what the venue would be or look like or
Mhm.
anything going into it. That was definitely a little bit of a surprise, but it was it was about what I expected, and I know how Sawyer gets off on tangents and things a bit uh ranty sometimes. I love him for it. We all love him for it. But yeah, so I sort of knew what to expect. But I don't know if Ryan knew what to expect. The museum owner that was kind of spearheading the thing.
I think we were standing right next to each other, listening to Sawyer kind of just talk and answer questions in that little room upstairs that we were all kind of smushed together in for the
Yeah.
first couple hours. And I think I took notice of you at one moment where Sawyer was talking about what it's like to be in contact with the next level today. I think because I was standing right next to you, and you're much taller than me, so I was looking at the back of your head. So I know it, but I noticed your head started nodding when Sawyer said that, and I was kind of looking around the room, and I'm like, nobody else is nodding. So,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna make sure I want to talk to this guy a little bit more after this, and then what ended up happening was we ended up getting a ride together, right?
Mm.
Because well, I don't know if you want to tell that, you might be able to tell that better than I
Well,
would.
I
I don't.
I specifically got a hotel room like within walking distance of the museum, which it's like 2 miles probably from the museum, but that's walking distance for me. And I'd walked to the museum and was about to walk out, and I think Kathy maybe asked me if I was walking, and I was like, "Yeah, I was going to. It's fine. It's like a mile and a half from here." And she might have volunteered you. Maybe you
A little bit.
volunteered or she volunteered you, either one. But she was like, maybe you guys could just carpool over there.
Hmm.
We sort of looked at each other and was like, "Yeah, okay, you know."
Yeah, I was gonna have to walk past you anyway to get to where I parked. So yeah, that would have been it wouldn't have been right to drive by you on the road. Like, I'll see you there when I have like plenty of room in my car,
Right. I
So,
really appreciated it. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, well,
I was
it
totally
was
prepared
good.
to walk, but
It was good because we got a chance to like kind of get to know each other a little bit on the way over. And
mm,
yeah, that was which was really cool for me. Because I I didn't know that I would meet up someone at the event that, like Sawyer and Kathy, is kind of personally invested in the Heaven's Gate teachings.
mm,
Like, I think for the most part, I mean, I guess I wouldn't know for sure, but I think for the most part, most of the people there, it seemed like, were kind of just curious, at least from the people that I talked to, um, or either curious about Sawyer and Kathy specifically, or had been like lifelong obsessed with Heaven's Gate,
yeah,
and everything in between. And I think there were some people who were just there at the museum anyway, and they were like, "Oh, there's this event going on,
yeah,
with this Heaven's Gate cult. Okay, cool, I'm in."
mm,
So you had kind of like a little bit of everything, in terms of
come on.
the people that came. But yeah, I think when I saw you nodding along to that, I noticed. I was like, that's it, it's the way that I feel myself nodding when I'm listening to like Ram Dass or Alan Watts or something like that, and I'm like,
Right.
they I mean they have different words for it, but it's kind of like the nod you give when you're like hearing something that you already knew, but you didn't know
Mhm.
you knew.
Yeah.
And it almost always has some kind of spiritual connotation to it. So I thought
Mhm.
that was interesting. And the more I talked to you, the more I kind of started to recognize that you know, these teachings mean something to you that um they might not necessarily mean to everyone else that was there at the
Right.
event. Um how would you say that these teachings kind of blend into like your daily life? Like what is it like to be, I know you said there's not really a term for it, but someone who believes in T and O, believes in the Heaven's Gate teachings.
Um, I mean, there's not really any like ritual aspects or anything to speak of. Sometimes, if I'm reading and there's been times that I've like tried random like liquid fasts and stuff that I've seen them detail and stuff like that, that I've sort of tried to do to get in the mindset, or, feel closeness to the class. But in general, it's not something I openly speak about to everyone, in my life. It's more of an internal pursuit. Um, a big thing for me is I try to consciously keep T, dough, and the next level example in my mind as I go through, operating different tasks in life. Um, for the class, they tried to keep next level mind all the time, to sort of constantly go about your tasks and be like, what would T and Doe do about this? What would T and Doe do about this situation or that situation? No matter how minute it was sometimes. So I try to mentally keep myself on that. And whenever it comes to, I've got a pretty public job. I deal with a lot of people on a daily basis. So I try to keep in mind, you know, how I could respond better, or, stuff like personal control, like not getting frustrated with people and angry, whenever I can identify it and stop it and things like that. Um, it is sort of a lifestyle thing, I guess, more than a like ritual activity sort of thing. Like I generally try to keep them on my mind, whether it's listening to things or watching tapes whenever I have the time, or even just, you know, running over the things that I've already heard in my head as I go throughout my day. Pretty much just kind of mindfulness in a way, which that was something they believed in, was drawing on the next level mind to know how to go forward and kind of feel your way through decisions, according to, what is right. And
How would you
I feel like I had some more I was going to mention, but
no go
sobriety
ahead.
sobriety for me has been a big thing that I took on in response to the material. um
Mhm.
that was a big thing. Me and you had mentioned it before to each other, but I quit drinking after many, many years as a result of this material.
You quit drinking right after the meeting with Sawyer and Kathy, right?
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
that's pretty fascinating.
Mhm.
Which I didn't know that until we talked last week. I think we were saying like, yeah, that was it after that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd been in
Sounds
the
like it had an
process.
impact on you.
Mhm. I mean, I'd been in the process of cutting back anyway.
Mhm.
Besides, just taking care of my vehicle and things, I gradually grew to feel bad. Sort of feeling like, how can I claim that I believe in this if I'm not, you know, doing anything about it, so to speak, or if I'm not living like they would, trying to live like they would live. And I pretty much, after probably 6 to 8 years of daily drinking, I started cutting back at that point whenever we met. And then after that, now I've been 4 or 5 months, haven't drank at all, pretty much stopped cold turkey. I don't feel like I ever could have done it without the next level guidance, I guess, without the
Mm.
sort of reinforcement for me. Um, so it's been a big thing for me so far.
You mentioned this next level mind and next level example. Like, how would you explain the difference between the next level mind and the mind of, I guess, the human mind, or the human way of doing things versus a next level way of doing things?
Um, that really depends a lot on a like situation to situation basis, but T and Doe gave guidance on all sorts of various things and sort of how to go about them. One big thing that I've appreciated, and even sometimes when it's been difficult to appreciate, crew-mindedness, of having to do your actions without yourself being the forefront. um do it to help others around you, like the class did for each other. Or there are tapes where they talk about how to handle disagreements at your job and things like that, and a lot of those have helped me, because they sort of taught, like, go be a good employee, do the best you can. A lot of the times, whenever there are times I'll get frustrated at my job, and there's a part of this tape where Doe's talking, and he says, the last thing that we would want is for any of our students or anybody to be the ones going into their job and causing problems. I mean,
Yeah.
if there was some sort of serious issue you couldn't get over, they'd say maybe you should find another out of craft task then, if you can't get along at this one.
That's what they would call their jobs, right? Like,
Yeah,
they're out
yeah,
of craft because they called
tasks.
the house the craft, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah,
And then they all had tasks around the craft, whether it was
like
laundry.
chores and stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Or, some of them were proofreading the writings that they put out, or, some of them worked with computers at the house, and, various things. They all sort of had specialties, and sort of different areas of strengths and weaknesses, I suppose.
So the shirt that you're wearing has the away team patch logo on it.
Mhm.
From This was what they sewed onto their, or I don't know if they ironed it on or sewed it onto their shirts,
Mhm.
when they took their own lives in the events of 1997. Is that a daily wear for you, or is this just for
Um,
special events?
uh, yes and no. The only reason it's not a more common wear is because it's long sleeve. But
Gotcha.
um, I do. I have multiple Heaven's Gate shirts and stuff that I wear. Even to my job and things like that. And
Really?
yeah, I mean,
What's
I'm
the reaction? Does it vary, I guess, or
not much of any really.
okay.
There's been like one time in probably 2 years that I've been at the place I work now, and maybe one time I've had somebody be like, "Is that a Heaven's Gate T-shirt?" I was just like, "Yep," and they're like, "That's crazy." And then that was just kind of the end of it. Like, to my surprise, I've never really had anybody say anything about it.
Yeah, that is surprising because I know that's something Sawyer and Kathy are really big on. Um, and they almost use it as kind of I don't know what the right word is for it, because I don't want to use, I mean, well, I guess it is a kind of evangelizing.
Right.
Not in the beat you
Kind
over
of,
the head with the Bible kinds, but
yeah,
just
like a
making it
billboard.
known. Yeah, like
Yeah.
letting people know that if you want to talk about this, we've got the shirt on. It says, "What if they're right?" So,
Yeah.
you um, that is interesting. I maybe not as many people are aware of all the iconography that's associated with the group.
Hmm.
That could be it too.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, I live in a pretty conservative right wing sort of area, and
mhm.
I think a lot of people probably just don't know anything about it to begin with, really. Um, I, yeah, I've never had anything said. And I mean, a lot of the times I'm usually wearing something, with one of the logos on it, or I've got a shirt with the older member portrait on the back. That one's gotten a couple, like, is that an alien, sort of, random things like that, but like not knowing anything else about it. So I just sort of shrug it off. But
What about with your music? Because with your music, as far as I understand it, one of the things you try to do is actually like incorporate. It sounds like you almost do like these mixtapes of your own music mixing in with like the audio recordings of Applewhite
yeah.
and uh, Nettles, I guess, to whatever extent her recordings make their way in there.
Mhm.
What are people's reactions when you're DJing, at the
Right.
venue, and all of a sudden you got this guy talking about the earth about to be recycled and that kind of stuff? What are
Um,
people to that?
well, it's mixed, but in a funny way. Some people just hear it and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's cool," like sort of the what's the word? The kind of true crime fan sort of sphere of things. Like people are like, "Oh, that's Heaven's Gate," that's cool, that's crazy, blah blah
Mm,
blah. But the thing is, as part of my sort of sympathetic portrayal of them, not that they need me to like defend them or anything, but um i use I don't use things that are I usually don't use anything from Planet Earth about to be recycled, or any of the latter ones that sort of focused on what was about to happen, because that was sort of situation specific in a way. And like, people use clips of that all over documentaries and everything. So I've
that
a lot of the
wasn't the stuff
times.
that like you were supposed to be incorporating into your daily affairs as much, right?
Right. I mean, there's definitely something to be learned from all of it, but as far as
Mhm.
like, here's what we actually believe, that's what I've sort of done. I use Beyond Human a lot, and I do live performances mainly. I'm in the process of trying to record some stuff. I just slowly working on it.
Yeah, I saw the picture you put on the Discord of your studio, I guess, or your
Yeah,
desktop at least.
my meager practice table I was using, but yeah, I'll be whenever I perform next time, I'll be using Beyond Human Part 2. I usually prepare some sort of recording to run pretty much the entire time, and then I sort of just perform under it. Um, it's really good material to use, even besides my emotional connection to it. It just makes for really good, goes really well with music. Sawyer plays music and
Mhm.
incorporates a lot of it, not recordings. He uses his own words more, but I pretty much just play recordings unedited or anything for the most part, just recordings of them talking over top of me playing.
It's
And
interesting because there are some artists that do something more similar to what you're doing with like I think the artist's name is Deep Forest. Like they put like ambient or electronica music to the over the recordings of like people like Ram Dass and Alan
mhm,
Watts and I guess Terrence McKenna, those
yeah.
kind of guys. And that kind of produces an interesting effect, probably in a similar way. Do you know if there's anyone else that's kind of doing what you're doing with Heaven's Gate, or are you kind of have you cornered the market on that at the moment?
Um, I mean, there are other artists that have put out um Heaven's Gate related music and stuff. One big one for me, one I really enjoy, even though it's not the most sympathetic view, but Drab Majesty. Um, they have an album called The Demonstration. It's
Hmm.
kind of like new wave, post punk, um, kind of shoegaze type stuff.
Okay.
And they in their music videos and stuff, they like reproduce the video effect where Doe's sitting in the chair and it's kind of like echoing back behind him. They've somehow recreated that. And the
As
whole
an aside, do you know what the thinking was behind that? Like why they decided to film that video with that effect? Because they don't use that in like anything else, as far as I'm aware.
I think I'm not entirely sure. I
You're talking
think
about where it's like if you're pointing a camera
yeah,
at another screen and you see like
yeah, and it's like
right.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Um, I think it's Doe's final exit is the tape maybe where it has that.
Yeah,
If
that's
if
the
I
one.
remember right, um, if I remember right, I think it was an accident
That's what I
because
always thought, but I
I
was never sure.
I believe in at some point in one of the videos, Doe addresses it and he's like, after we recorded it, we happened to see that, all this stuff's going on back here, but we kind of think it looks cool. And like they ended up leaving it. If I remember right, that's how it went. It was just an accident with the way they'd had cameras pointed or something like that.
That was the tape that they chose to play at the first Heaven's Gate Reexamined event.
Mm, yeah.
And what was that like? Kind of was it different seeing it on the big screen versus seeing it like on your
Yeah.
TV or your phone? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. It was huge because the way that you and I were sitting, we were kind of like to the right. So whenever we had to turn ourselves to see the screen was like
Hmm.
8 feet away from us. So we're
Yeah.
like right in front of this entire wall. And it was imposing in a way of like never seen it that blown up that big before. But I mean, the whole day was kind of emotionally strong for me, I guess, in general. Meeting Sawyer and everything, I was, like I said, I was kind of starstruck and like fighting tears at points, which kind of surprised me. But um, yeah, sitting there and watching that video was really powerful to me. And also knowing that Sawyer had been with the class like so long and him sitting and watching it, that was another thing that crossed my mind while I was sitting there is like, how does he feel?
Of course, after that event, there was another one, just a few months later that you went to that I wasn't at, but was a lot bigger, not just in
Yeah.
terms of the audience, but in terms of the guests that were there.
Yeah.
There were some people there that maybe a year or so ago, anyone familiar with Heaven's Gate history might not have expected to be ever in the same room together again.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
yet, yeah. So kind of a major, I think kind of a major moment in like the ongoing story of Heaven's Gate that's like
Mhm.
still kind of unfolding today.
Yeah.
Um, did you want to talk a little bit about this most recent event that they had?
Yeah. Yeah, I forgot until afterwards that none of it was filmed or anything really. There's a couple photos floating around here and there, but this one, I mean, I felt like it was bound to be some sort of special from the get-go because it was the 26th anniversary
Mhm.
of the suicides or graduation, depending on how you look at it.
Mhm.
And um Sawyer and Kathy were there again. And then this time Carloti came, and Wanoti, who was kind of a satellite member for a long time. He came from Venezuela to be at the
Okay.
event. So it was really unexpected for all of them to have been there from kind of four corners of different places.
And both of these individuals, Carlotti and Wanoti, they were part of the original group at one time or another, correct?
Yeah. 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 From what I recall, Wanoti had joined in person sometime around the mid 70s also, whenever it was really new. And from what I'd heard, he sort of came in and out of the group at different time periods, but he always was like pretty much on, good grounds with them. Um, at some point he went back to Venezuela, but he still stayed in contact with them. Following the graduation, Carloti was very closely involved with Rick Cody, and they did a lot. Riccoti was the one that had the what if they were right? You see that on a lot of Heaven's Gate stuff. That was Riccoti's contribution, and he published a lot of the class's material, and a lot of the tapes that are available today, from what I understand, were digitized by him and Carloti working together on various things to get the information out.
Do you know much about the naming convention as far as the attaching of Odie to the end of their names? Because as far as I understand it, this wasn't their original, this wasn't their birth names, right? That would
Right.
be a weird coincidence, I guess, if all these people came together who had these unusual names. Like, do you know kind of how that worked? Like why they attached the ODY to the end of their names and kind of what the purpose of that was?
From what I understand, of course I could be wrong. From what I understand, they sort of chose the names in a way. The Odie names to sum it up in a way, from what I have understood it, is meaning child of God in a way. Like, so say the name God, God, this would be odd, so to speak. The like OD end of the word would be a family name.
Mm-hmm.
And then in a way, the adding the Y to it sort of made them, that was their expression of it being under, like instead of being God, it's under God. So it's OD instead of the letters OD, literally, it's ODY. So however they came up with the first part of the name, some of them you can see why they called people that and some of them not. But then sort of first name, last name, and the OD title is what only the people in the class used, but that was, from what I understand, it's supposed to mean first part child of God, or in the family of God, and the succession of older members, because there is sort of a hierarchy to the next level in a way. So that was their expression of being children of the kingdom of heaven, or the next level.
That's interesting. I don't actually think I ever really knew that child of God connection. I mean, the only thing I can compare that to is that, like a lot of like the kind of exodus of Westerners that, went to like India, for example, in like the 60s, 70s, like Richard Alpert, who later took the name Ram Das, which means servant of Ram. And then there's his friend Krishna Das, the famous kirtan musician, servant of Krishna. That sort of naming convention in a similar way kind of took place over there, I guess. Yeah, I bring that up because I know when I talked to Sawyer about kind of similarities between Heaven's Gate and Eastern religions, he doesn't seem to be that interested.
Right.
And I think the reason is not because he's not interested in those religions themselves, but because from his perspective, it seems like it's kind of, I've already got my thing, figured out.
Right.
And, but the reason I do it, I think, is to kind of emphasize to people that, as obviously Heaven's Gate is unique in many, many facets, but there are certain things that are common to Heaven's Gate that are common to other religions, to try and kind of balance out that discourse around, like, the oddness and the unusualness of it. Because you don't want to completely try and make every religion look the same. That's a mistake I see a lot of people make. They want to try and focus too much on the similarities, and you end up missing the things that make them special and unique from one another. But with Heaven's Gate, there's always that risk of the other extreme where it's like, this is so unusual and so different that you almost end up only focusing on some of the more disturbing aspects, like their final act of taking their lives to get on the spaceship.
Right.
And I remember when, I think we've talked about this on the Discord server a few times, that the news coverage of the suicides at the time was very different from what it is 26 years later.
Hmm.
I think at the time, I don't know how much of like the older news coverage you've watched, but one thing I've noticed and a few of the other people on the server have noticed is that the the news reports that came out right after it happened seemed to allow for much more nuance in the way they talked about it. Like
Yeah.
there's one program that a much younger Chris Wallace was actually doing when he worked for ABC or CBS, I can't remember. And he kind of opens the segment. This is like a week after the suicides, and he kind of opens the segment by saying, like, look, all these people are talking about, like, look at what these crazy folks did in California. Isn't that strange? Isn't it so weird? But, he's like, maybe we shouldn't be looking at it like that. Maybe we should be looking at, like, not how different these people are from us, but how similar they are. Because I think that is kind of a lot more disturbing.
Yeah.
Obviously you can take that to a ridiculous extreme. Not every religion, not every group is like Heaven's Gate. Quite frankly, not every group ends in mass suicide. So that's a big difference maker for
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it is important to be able to look at some of the similarities between Heaven's Gate and other groups. But what I think I kind of know where Sawyer stands on that, but where do you fall on that issue? Do you think that's worthwhile to pursue, or do you think that's best left to just the academic study of Heaven's Gate? Do you think that doesn't really have much relevance to you personally?
Um, I mean, I'm constantly amazed at like you were saying, there's sort of Eastern aspects to what they believe that were put into it with reincarnation in a way, and sort of suffering the mistakes over and over until you sort of get it right. And I mean, I think a lot of the media shies away from those conversations of what influenced them or how similar they are to some of us. Because I think it's intimidating. Like you said, it can be scary how similar someone is to us. But yeah, I mean, for them, they, as far as the way they lived on a day-to-day basis with the class and everything, I mean, they had jobs and stuff, and a lot of people outside of the group didn't really know that they were into anything like that. Like they thought that they were just normal, I don't know, religious happy people. Like, they didn't think much different of them. I mean, I think it is a lot more normal and a lot brighter, maybe, or better than these portrayals are put out, which I'm not really sure of the reasons why the story's been positioned the way that it has. But I think it scared Christians a lot at the time, probably once the beliefs and things started coming out. I think it's kind of a provocative message in that way of like, you're not going to heaven the way that you thought you were. You're not doing enough to go to the next level or to see heaven. Part of me thinks there's probably a reason why these more reasonable or more honest depictions of what they believed aren't being shown. I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but there's very little making them look good going on despite all the evidence to the contrary. Because I mean, whenever you ask somebody about it, that's one of the first things they'll say is like UFOs or doomsday or this or that or the other. And to me, UFOs are inaccurate, like I was saying earlier, with the way that the class looked at UFO phenomenon. And it wasn't a doomsday cult. I mean, they didn't say that like the world was going to end. They said it was going to be recycled, end of an age stuff. But I think it's all a bit misleading. And I mean, even for me personally, like I haven't read many of Benjamin Zeller's stuff, but from watching his interviews and things, he doesn't seem to draw the same conclusions that other people that I don't know, doesn't seem to see the connections to how normal it sort of is, I guess, that I do or some other people do whenever they look at them. But
Do you mean like someone like an academic, a sociologist, you know, something like that, like someone who's approaching Heaven's Gate from like a religious studies perspective, like as a scholar, you know, is not drawing the same conclusions insofar as they don't buy into the teachings.
no, I mean, I don't think they see the parallels, I guess. Like,
Okay.
with the how Heaven's Gate relates to Christianity or, reincarnation ideas and things like that. You don't usually hear things like that discussed of the deeper beliefs and how they correlate to other systems, I guess. Like you said, Sawyer wasn't super interested in the like Eastern angle. A lot of these people seem like they don't really look at any of those other angles either in a lot of the portrayals that I've seen.
Yeah,
But
that's an interesting point. Yeah.
the class studied a lot of different material, though. They read plenty of Eastern writings at different time periods when they got instruction to do so. And they read the Bible some, and they read, like, from what I understand, like the Nag Hammadi library, stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I'm sure all kinds of other religious teachings over the years. They were pretty open minded to looking at other belief systems and things, even as set in their ways as they sort of were.
Did they ever comment on like the diversity of religious paths that exist? Like, um do they look at other religions as a deviation from the correct path, or do they look at them as just different expressions of the same thing? Like, is this would it be closer to say that it's a matter of all paths lead to God or to the next level, or would you say that's not accurate?
Um, that's one thing I thought was pretty interesting about them, because there were talks, sometimes in recordings, Doe would say, there are people out there that have never heard of us, or maybe never heard anything like this message, but the way that they are living automatically has them further along because it's closer to next level thinking and behavior, whether they've came in contact with our information or not. Like
Hmm.
monks, for instance, they talked about, like, Eastern monks and things like that a lot, as those people being closer than many people, like in the, say, America, for instance. But one thing I like that they did say specifically regarding this is can't remember if it was T or Doe that said it, which one, but they said there's 100 ways up the mountain, but we're the only way off the mountain.
Hmm. I like that.
Yeah. And I mean, that was something I
That could
liked.
be taken a number of ways, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that was something I liked a lot, because I kind of didn't like the um finality sort of religious ways of being like, we're the only way, we're the only one that knows the way. you know this, it sort of took other belief systems into account in a way, instead of just like denying them or casting them out. And I forgot where I was going with it, but I always liked that about them, being pretty open-minded. But they did say that, there are plenty of people that are on different paths, that are in different grades, going through to eventual graduation to the next level. And that, they told the class, they were like, there's probably people out there that are farther along than you are, that are just living different and maybe even having an easier time with it because of, whatever else they're doing. So it kind of it wasn't necessarily a one size fits all sort of situation in that way of like, and like you said, a lot of people were drawn to different things in the group and different belief systems and things that brought them to that point. And I'm still looking more into the only way off the mountain as far as like how they relate to other belief systems, because I'd like to hear them elaborate more on some of that and probably class tapes and things like that. But it, like you said, for a lot of people, it seems like you look at a lot of different things and it leads you to this point, so to speak. And that's kind of the way that I felt. And whenever I heard there are many ways up the mountain, but this is the way to get off the mountain, that was sort of the way I felt. Was like I'd kind of been led to this point, and all the other things that I'd learned and read and everything had sort of culminated in me accepting this information whenever I did had it presented to me.
What happens to people now, like who don't believe in Heaven's Gate? Like what happens to them after they die, basically?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing that comes up with like me having grown up in a conservative Christian area. Everybody has that idea, the questions of like, I don't know, where did God come from? Like these different sort of abstract questions, I guess. And a lot of the times, whenever people ask T and Do stuff like that, and a lot of times that I've heard, they'd say, either that's not really something important to be focusing on, like you said, like there's more practical things to be done. Or they would say, you know, I'll try to ask the next level older members, see what they say, and I'll let you know. Or plenty of times they just straight up say we don't know. And, it wasn't given to us to know all these details and things. And they did really focus a lot on, what they were doing then rather than like prophecy and stuff like that, which I think that's what a lot of people expect out of cults, is like prophecy and saying what's going to happen in the future and things like that, which I mean, there was a little bit of that over time with Heaven's Gate. But they were also, willing to admit when they were wrong or be open to new information as far as how to go forward or various things. I guess that they weren't focused on soothsaying or like future telling or anything like that. And they were pretty honest whenever they didn't know or didn't feel like they should say it. They'd pretty openly tell people.
I
And
guess some people might hear that and say, well, that might be true of some aspects, but they seemed pretty certain about getting on the spaceship in 97. Would you be open to offering any thoughts on what made that feeling different from, say, their like original way of talking about like these lower forces? Like that was something that changed a lot over the years. Like they went from kind of this kind of like personifying them sort of thing to kind of abandoning that and saying, well, we're not really sure what they are. They're something, maybe they're other aliens, maybe they're from Satan or the equivalents.
right.
Point being, it was something that kind of evolved and shifted. Some people might hear that and say, well, maybe they just didn't know what they were talking about, or maybe they were selective in terms of when they said, okay, this is something we're 100% sure about. The spaceship is here and we've got to end our physical lives in order to get on the spaceship. I guess what I'm asking is, maybe it's a difficult question to answer, maybe difficult to ask also, I guess, is what made them so sure that they were getting on the spaceship, particularly when we consider the fact that there were many things that they were open about not being sure of. There are many times where Doe would say, you know what, the information I gave you yesterday, that was wrong. I'm giving you new information now. But that didn't happen in 1997. Do you have any thoughts as to why they felt so sure about it?
I mean, it's hard to know the specifics of it as it was primarily motivated on Doe's relationship to T after she wasn't in her vehicle anymore. But one thing I did, well, you briefly sort of mentioned this idea earlier when you said that me and Kathy and Sawyer a lot say, I could be wrong, or, if I remember right, and things like that. And they were the group encouraged that a lot, of like not really speaking in as definitive of terms unless there's some way that you do know 100% for a fact, which in this case, a lot of the things that T said and stuff, they were accepted as fact because she was the older member to everyone in the situation. And even after that, I mean, years later, they would go through a period where they all, every time they said something, prefaced it with like, I could be wrong, I feel this way, rather than like, I know, be like, I feel this way. And a lot of T and Doe is speaking that way. Later, it does at least get a bit more direct, I guess, like you were saying, like how they would know for sure. And I mean, Doe spent a period of years and years, well, asking what was going to happen with the class and things like that. If they should leave their vehicles, when the time would be, things of that nature. Because at the beginning they thought that T and Doe were going to be assassinated, perhaps, or martyred publicly or something like that. And then over time, they feel like they get different messages from the next level, and they're open enough to keep growing with it. And there were a couple times where, like whenever T passed, a common thing a lot of people will say is that the group was shaken or wasn't as sure because like they didn't think that she was going to pass or something like that. But a lot of it is kind of trumped up that way to hear like older members talk about it. Like they still trusted the plan and the message and everything, even though T had passed, when they didn't think they would, because they did realize that the next level operates on a completely different level of understanding to what we do. And I mean, other than personal contact that Doe had with the next level, it's hard to say what made him so sure or what made them agree that it was time for it. I would just be speculating at that, but pretty much they taught that one of the only ways you could be sure of anything was to try to make sure that what you were receiving was coming from the next level or an older member, by seeking to contact them directly via telepathic, sort of prayer means, and to try to constantly be in tune with what your next level is, what your older member is trying to be in one mind with them, was what Doe tried to do, trying to kind of constantly be in connection with Doe or with T and be making decisions in the way that she would want. And I mean, it's hard to say what definitively what Doe definitively got from the next level to have decided that it was the time. But I know even at the time of graduation, there were sometimes Doe and people had said things that there was a possibility that some of the classmates could have potentially have to be put back if they weren't completely done overcoming. Like they felt like they felt like it was time, but the next level might not see it the same way. So I mean, there was always kind of an open-endedness to it, of feeling it out and trying your best to listen and properly execute what the next level wants you to do. And Doe himself said that it was more difficult to know exactly what the next level wanted because his older member wasn't with him in a body anymore. And I mean, as long as anybody's here without an older member, you're Sawyer and Kathy have said stuff like this before. Whenever you're here without an older member, it's much easier to be led one way or another by influences and, psycho-spiritual phenomenon, stuff like that. And that's one thing I've been reading at lately is sort of how to correctly address and contact the next level and be sure of where, if I receive something back, I can be sure of where it's coming from rather than just sort of psychically projecting and whatever I hear back, I'm like, oh, that's them, So it's hard to say.
But just so I understand you correctly, it sounds like what you're saying is there's obviously no way to know for sure what they were thinking other than what they expressed, whether that was in the exit statements or Doe's final exit, those last recordings they made in the couple days leading up to the suicides. Other than that, we can't mind read. We can't go back in time and know exactly what they thought. But that from your perspective, your belief is that whatever it was, Doe or Applewhite, received something from the next level, and this that this message or this feeling that he got, whatever it was, is what he ended up basing his decision, and I guess what the group as a whole based their decision on to eventually take their own lives. With that up to that point, is that kind of accurate as far as how you feel about it?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the first questions that comes up a lot is, why aren't these people who currently believe in Heaven's Gate, why aren't they preparing themselves to get on the spaceship?
Right.
That's something that Sawyer and Kathy, I think, have endeavored quite strongly to make clear that that's not part of their praxis, so to speak, today. Like, they're not encouraging people to harm themselves or take their own lives. In fact, Sawyer, I think, has had to field quite a number of phone calls over the last couple decades from people expressing a desire to do exactly that, and him kind of having to talk them off the ledge. From as someone who believes in these teachings, how would you explain that to somebody? Like, how do you reconcile this belief that at the time, from their perspective, it made sense, to the group, to their minds, it made sense what they did, from their own logic, but that at this current time, that isn't something that you're personally planning to do. At least I would hope not, and I'm assuming not.
No, I wouldn't.
But I think a lot of people are confused about how that actually reconciles, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one big question I've got a lot is, anytime it comes up, I'm like, this is not about suicide. Does not want anyone to commit suicide. And I even say, there's a statement against suicide on the website, and that's obviously hard for a lot of people to understand that a group of 39 people that seemingly committed suicide would put out an anti-suicide statement. But
that's kind of the issue, isn't it? I think some people are like, well, that looks like suicide to me, but from the group's perspective,
right,
they had a different definition of suicide, right? One that might be kind of unconventional, I guess.
Well, that's another one of the puzzling things. Like you were talking about the student exit statements. If you watch the exit statements, everybody's smiling, laughing some, and like nobody's in any distress or anything like that, which is not characteristic of other human suicide scenarios that we've seen. And I think that immediately shows something as far as like, just from your average perspective of it, if you were to look at the events and then look at the exit statement videos, I remember years ago telling somebody, I was like, if that was suicide, I've never seen like a happier, more at peace people to commit suicide, you know, ever in history that I've known of. But for them, in my way of trying to explain it to people, it was situational. That's not something in the beliefs that you're supposed to do. The main reason why now, people that follow it now, of course, shouldn't do it is that, for one, we're not ready in any regard, whether we died in a car crash or whether we died by our own hands or something. We're not ready at this point to enter into the next level. Many would say that without an older member present on earth, whether it was, Enoch or Jesus Christ, or I believe Moses was considered an older member, or Tiendo or whoever,
Meaning someone who
somebody who had
helped
done it
other
before.
Okay, somebody who
Somebody,
can guide you.
yeah, yeah,
Gotcha.
somebody who has overcome the human level before, entered the next level, and come back to show other people how to do it. We don't have anybody there to do that now. So we are not ready, pretty much. And in the statement against suicide, they go on to say that if you were to take your life right now, you would be setting yourself back further in the grades, so to speak. That's something that they sort of like grades in school. You would be setting yourself back because you need to have your vehicle to learn lessons and go through life experiences and things in order to grow toward being a member of the next level. And the difference between us and them is they had their older members present. They were in an accelerated program, so to speak, since they had them close. And, if you look at the story of Jesus Christ, after Christ was crucified, many of the apostles were martyred as well, or exiled, or, disappeared in one way or another. And, the way I look at it is just for around here dealing with a lot of Christian people, I tell them not every Christian is expected to go out and be crucified in order to
Good point.
yeah. And they don't expect you to go out and literally be martyred for your beliefs. If it comes to that, you should be willing and ready to do it according to the Bible and, the words of Jesus Christ. You should be willing to accept death for it, but you don't have to go out and literally get yourself killed by somebody in order to do what Jesus did, so to speak. Doe talked times about, you could be learning and going through the program and your vehicle's taken out of commission in like a car accident and you're separated from your vehicle. That's going to put you back until you are replaced in another vehicle to keep working on it, as long as you're going in the right direction. But for them, the idea is that they were ready, and to have stayed here on earth any longer would have made them all go backwards, sort of. They wouldn't have been any better for staying. They had done as much as they could do, so they decided to move on. And one of the ways they kind of related that was, Jesus was in the Trinity. Jesus is God / Son of God. Jesus took a vehicle to come to earth to do his mission as an older member and show people how to enter into his Father's kingdom. Once Jesus's mission here was done, he was crucified and laid down his vehicle. And, in the Bible, it says, "No man taketh my life from me. I lay it down." And that was sort of in their mind, I think in some ways, from what I've understood, that was sort of suicide on Jesus's part in a way, in kind of the same way they were doing it, is that you could have chose something else, but instead you're laying down your vehicle because your work here is done. And that was, for them, it wasn't a sad thing. And to members, former members and people who believe now, we don't look at it as a bad thing. There's obviously that sort of ingrained recoil to the information that I think a lot of people still have. And I kind of have a knee-jerk reaction to it too, because it is difficult to explain properly. Because, I would hate for anybody to think that I was condoning suicide or that I thought that that's what somebody should do. But, it was a thing to be celebrated to us, because they were happy about it and they fully believed in what they were doing. It wasn't, crying and miserable, depressed people, like people would usually think of as suicide. And it's hard to imagine from a human line of thinking. It's hard to imagine people taking this course of action. But one thing I would fire back with is that this wasn't designed to be human thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So
You mean the teachings of Heaven's Gate weren't
well,
designed?
I mean, even like the rationalization of people looking at it and saying, how are these people sitting here smiling and laughing and they turn around and commit suicide? Like, in the human mind, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's like they weren't operating by human ways at that point. They weren't thinking in the same way that humans would usually think of such things.
Do you think it makes sense, though, from someone who's not sold on this ideology? Do you think it makes sense for such a person to view, the exit or the graduation as just a mass suicide, and to view the cult as, if not crazy, perhaps misled or misguided? Even if you don't agree with that assessment, would you say it makes sense, at least from an outsider's point of view, someone who's not initiated in it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could totally see how somebody would think that. And whenever I started with a more empathetic or sympathetic belief, that was kind of where I started, was like, maybe it wasn't right that the people did that. Maybe they were misled in some way, but there's no denying that they believed what they were doing. And there's no denying that they chose to, which was another important thing to me, was everyone had their choice of whether they did that or not. No one was forced. If you said you didn't want to, then, you didn't have to, and you can, go, if you don't want to participate. And, that is one of the things that obviously sticks out the most about the case is, the suicides. That's the whole, it's a big deal.
That's where the story begins for most people. It begins with the discovery of the bodies, basically.
Yeah. And I mean, even for me, I didn't know that they had been a group for so long before that happened. Because you don't usually hear about that. But I mean, it's like, I guess, the dark part of the story, but in reality, it's not that dark to me. I mean, it is, but, if you're in a belief system that believes in reincarnation and things anyway, death is not that alien, I guess, so to speak. And which also, just me personally, growing up, I experienced a lot of like family members passing away and things like that. So that was I've been acquainted with the concept of death for a long time, and it didn't take a whole lot of effort on my part to like sympathize and understand and see why these people did the things that they did, and not think anything negatively about it or about them, or I don't think they were crazy by any means, as far as like mentally ill or anything like that goes. I don't think there was anything like that going on, really. any more than, your average person. But another thing I've tried to explain to people too is, even, the belief aspects of it aside, you had a group of people that, just from like a human standpoint, you had a group of people that lived together as a group. Some people had been there for over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
They were a family. They took care of each other. They, did everything together. Um, by the time graduation came around, a lot of them were, in their late 50s, 60s, you know, uh, most of them were up in years. That's another thing I don't think a lot of people understand, is that a lot of the members were, I guess, elderly or approaching it at the time. And, if even if it just came down to being as simple as they all wanted to go together and they didn't want to be apart, that's totally understandable to me. Even if you took the spiritual nature and belief system out of it, which I'm not discrediting any of that, but even just from a human point of view, it's pretty easy for me to understand why they did what they did.
Yeah, Alex, that's a really good point actually about sorry, the group, like that they achieved something that I think a lot of people, especially today, is we're in I would say arguably we're more atomized in society than we were in the
Yeah.
90s, when the internet was just beginning. I mean, there you can just look at the Heaven's Gate website and see what the internet looked like in
Yeah.
1997. It's very, very different now. And you have that whole discourse around social media now where it's like, are we being brought closer together or are we being pulled further apart?
Mm.
However you want to slice it. It seems like groups like this, and I would include utopian socialist communes, other alternative lifestyles, ashrams, monasteries, um, perhaps other cults. Like there is a reason why people are attracted to these things,
Mm.
and maybe some of it just comes down to wanting to be part of something. But I think, I mean, that would be like the standard. That's like the standard sociologist take on it, right?
Right.
They want to be part of something bigger. And I always thought that was weird because it's like, well, there's a lot of other things you could. I mean, join a sewing club or something. It's a lot
Yeah.
less commitment. Um, uh, but I guess the point I'm coming to with what you said is, do you think that part of the reason so many people find Heaven's Gate specifically interesting, even if they don't buy into the teachings themselves, that part of the reason people find it so moving and interesting is precisely because these individuals, when you take away the beliefs and all that stuff, achieved something that maybe a lot of people are lacking today, and that maybe that might be something that could explain why so many people join groups like that in the first place, that there is this sort of cohesion that is achieved in these small
Mm.
alternative lifestyle groups
Yeah.
that is so difficult to find, that we have to look, or that some people might feel like they have to look for in these very, way outside of the mainstream kind of groups. Do you think that has anything to do with the appeal of it?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it's weird. I mean, they were sort of communistic and isolated in some ways, but another thing that separates them from a lot of cults is that they were still pretty public in a way. Like with them having jobs and various things like that. Like it's just unlike anything I've seen. And like you said, to live in like a commune situation like that and it worked for so long is also like, and so well, is kind of unheard of. But a lot of that went back to their teachings of like crew-mindedness. And I mean, I've told people before, even if you took away, again, if you took away the specifics and the spiritual beliefs, it was kind of just a good way to live. I mean, body wise, they were pretty healthy, sober, active, as much as they could be. Um, treated each other respectfully and was considerate of how they treated each other and if they did their own tasks and things like that. And I definitely think a lot of that can appeal to people on different levels. I think one thing nowadays that appeals to some people that I've seen is like the lack of gender consciousness and things with
Mhm.
Heaven's Gate. There's been a couple of people I've encountered that have been really enticed by that, because I mean they were like not discriminatory on race, not discriminatory on gender, not discriminatory on, what your sexual preferences were before you joined or anything like that. Um, I feel like, even if somebody chooses not to believe in the message, there's definitely still a lot to be learned from them as a whole, even for it just to be a good way to live. And like meeting Wanodi and Sawyer and stuff, at one point I was sitting down figuring up how old they were, and I won't out them, but I once I got to my answer on how old they were, I thought, man, that's crazy, but they don't. And my partner agreed with me. She was like, they don't look like they're that old,
Yeah.
and I'm like, it's because you lived healthy and considerate and like respectful and things like that. Um, I mean, I'm sure the class enjoyed a bit of that. I know they bumped heads and stuff a lot, but at the same time, Doe had at one point, Sawyer tells the story where Doe came to him and was like, I don't want people to be staying here and staying with the group just because you're comfortable and just because you have like a community of support and all this stuff. Like, we want you to be here because you want to be here and you're working on your overcoming process. And that's the thing I think a lot of people don't understand is that it took a lot of effort to join the group in the first place. Sometimes, like, even to catch them after a meeting and like kind of hitch to their wagon, it took a lot of effort to find them, figure out where they were going, and then once you were in the class, you had to pretty much constantly prove yourself of that you were there for the right reasons. um
How would one do that? Like prove themselves?
well, I'm sure the thing is, another thing about it is it's all sort of such a personal pursuit, because everybody has sort of different areas where they need more attention and overcoming than not. Like, some people might not have any problem with drugs or alcohol, but they might be addicted to sugar or eating a whole lot, or maybe somebody's got a negative kind of hateful attitude. Um,
Mhm.
it was sort of different based on what you needed to work on in yourself. It was pretty different as far as that went. I know at one point there was a bunch of people that were sent out because I think a lot of that at the time was people refused to quit smoking pot, and a lot of people had issues being celibate, so they ended up sending a lot of people out because of stuff like that.
Would you say that Heaven's Gate is still active today, at least in the lives of the people, however few there may be, who believe in these teachings, but don't have a leader, so to speak, that's present on Earth at this time guiding them?
Hmm.
Um, and where would you say this group of people, yourself included, is kind of heading? Like, what's the end
End
goal?
result, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, well, there's not really a focused group of people now. Um, Obviously, I mean, you've got Kathy and Sawyer that are sort of at the forefront of things, and rightfully so. He definitely shies away from any attention or higher designation of what he is. But as far as advice and things, Sawyer, like I said, was in the group for such a long time, even compared to those that are with us or not. Um, but there's not any kind of formal group. It wouldn't really necessarily be appropriate to necessarily have a group without an older member. I mean, there are like, small communities across different websites and everything. Shout out to the boys on Discord. Uh, but there's different communities spread out across. I don't think there's really enough people that outwardly believe in it to warrant a group necessarily, because you have the former members, most of which still believe, that are scattered all over the place, and then you have maybe a handful of current people that say that they would believe, that are scattered all over the place also. And I mean, what we have to look to now is the words and the teachings of T and Do, obviously. The example set by the class, as far as whether it was being able to look at things they went through in their experience and learn from it, or look to writings that various classmates put out. It really enriches me to be able to talk to Carloti and Sawyer and various people that knew T and Do personally, or at least knew Do personally, when he was in vehicle. As far as the end result, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because it also ties to sort of the Christian symbology of it. Do talks about people who are left here in the time shortly after they are gone. And, with an older member not here, like I said, it's practically impossible to completely overcome the world on your own, with no, much less not having a group or anything, but also not having an older member to make sure that everybody's on the right track. And then from there down, check partners, keep each other, it's hard to do being so spread out. So a lot of people aren't going to see the next level or the kingdom of heaven whenever their vehicles expire. I don't expect that, at least the way I am now, that, if something were to happen and I lost my vehicle tomorrow, I don't think I'm going to be with them right now. I don't think I'm going to be in the next level. At that point, kind of the most you can hope for. I mean, you should still strive in your overcoming, whether you're going to have another chance, so to speak, or not. Do says we should go at it full force, like it's our only opportunity. But
Meaning go at it full force, meaning
trying
what?
your hardest to overcome, not putting off things. Say, like, now, I'm guilty of it. This idea of, well, there's no older member here, so I'm not going to be able to overcome on my, first try, or whatever try this might be that I'm on. I'm not going to be able to overcome on this try. So, like, why push as hard? Why, go full force if I feel like I'm not going to make it? And Do would say, you should rather go still try just as hard as you possibly can to get over these things, whether it's sexual nature or sobriety or having extreme emotions, whether it's, angry or depressed or even being too happy and energetic. We should still act like it's our only shot and time's running out. But Do also says the next level sees our progress in our grades that we're moving through and overcoming. And if you prematurely lose your vehicle before your overcoming is completed, and the next level deems that your soul's worth saving, more or less, that is what Jesus and Christians in the Bible refer to as being saved, quote unquote, is that you're set aside for another opportunity to come back and continue your overcoming. theoretically, at some point, we would come back into another vehicle in a time period that there is another older member present. So, like, for example, there had been theoretical discussions in the group that some of the classmates that graduated this time had known Jesus Christ in the previous classroom experience, but they didn't overcome then, or they weren't ready to go at that point.
So they've just been like reincarnating for the last couple thousand years until they met Doe.
Yeah. And then that was, you learn over those other lifetimes and theoretically keep moving through the grades. And then once you find yourself in another classroom circumstance with an older member, then theoretically, hopefully you'll be ready and can overcome and go to the next level.
So I'm not that well versed in the Bible anymore. It's probably been a while since I've picked it up and read it very closely. But one line that that's at least sticking out to me now is, the old, wherever two or three are gathered in my name, there I shall be.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like there's any relation between that verse and this idea of having a group in today's times?
Yeah. That's one thing I do feel strongly about, because, whether it's ashram or monastery or church or whatever, regardless of how you quantify it, you have a stronger field, sort of, or like a bigger antenna, the more people you have involved. So, like, when I've had been to these meetings and been with, whether it was just Sawyer and Kathy, or, Carloti or Wanoti, or various, times I got to spend with them outside of public stuff, I definitely felt it stronger. And like, I felt like there was more presence among us than there might be if we were just alone.
Mm.
Because for a lot of people that are, I can only really speak for myself, but like, I'm practically doing it alone. I have, like I said, Kathy and Sawyer that I contact, and Carloti and stuff, but for the most part, it is like a personal pursuit. But to actually find myself in those situations where I am, at least with them, that I know that believe and feel it, and somebody like Sawyer that's been in the physical presence of our older members, it definitely feels like a stronger sort of field whenever I'm in the presence of those people. And I think that does definitely apply to that verse. I was just thinking of that verse the other day, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a colleague of mine that often referenced that verse. Even as a secular philosopher, he found some meaning and value in that. It's a very poetic one for sure.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty apropos to this topic, and it's interesting that you were thinking of it as well.
Mm-hmm.
With that in mind, do you see any possibility of there being kind of a renaissance of these little pockets of Heaven's Gate belief at some point in the future?
Yes and no. I definitely think with the way that some of the ways that society is moving these days, I could definitely see how some people could find different parts of it that they're interested in. Like I was saying before, about different aspects of the beliefs appeal to different people. And, with a modern kind of movement of lack of gender consciousness and racial discrimination and things like that, as well as just the general beliefs. I mean, even if somebody was only into it, or only started looking at it because of they have an interest in UFOs or something, say, even if that was enough to get somebody paying attention to it, they say the Lord works in mysterious ways. And sometimes for some people, that can be a next level way of showing them something in it. That could be, sort of a next level way of getting them to look at the information in the first place. It's definitely not for everyone, or at least not everyone's going to respond to it the same way or as strongly. But everybody starts somewhere with it. And I definitely think the way the world is and the way the beliefs are, if more people would actually look at what they actually taught rather than just what you see in documentaries and things, though there are some good ones, it would, people would be surprised what they found. Because I mean, it happened to me. A lot of the reason why I started looking at it again was sort of the true crime fascination sort of things. And now I have next to no interest in that for the most part. Kind of since I became involved with the group, I was like, yeah, not really as interested in like serial killers and, dark things, I guess. But even though some people might get into it for morbid intrigue or something just because of suicides or whatever, it can lead a person in any number of ways, depending on how open they are to listen to it. And I mean, that's all T and Doe ever tried to do from the beginning was, here's the information we have, do what you want with it.
I guess before it sounded like you were saying kind of that, like whatever gets you interested in Heaven's Gate might not necessarily be what keeps you interested in it. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely, like for me, I've definitely grown in the sort of extraterrestrial aspects of it. I still hesitate to use the word alien and UFO and stuff, which for the reasons I explained earlier, I think that's kind of like a distraction from the actual things. Because I mean, even sometimes Doe would say, this is language that I'm using to help get you closer to understanding what I mean, instead of just like, parables, like Jesus spoke in parables of like putting it in other terms. Like whenever they watched Star Trek, they were like, that's pretty close to what the next level sort of operates like, of like you're a crew and there's sort of a chain of command and everybody does their part and everybody does their part for the good of the crew. So not literally this, but this sort of mindset and this sort of way of operating is going to get you closer to understanding what we're talking about. So like I have kind of gotten past my initial knee-jerk reaction of like the older member portrait and stuff like that, because like if you look at the older member portrait, it's kind of your atypical like what people expect of aliens to look like, which that's also an artist rendering, and nobody would have known what a member of the next level looked like in a next level body except for T, theoretically.
Would you say that the story of Heaven's Gate is still kind of being written as opposed to it ended 20 something years ago?
Yeah, that's one thing that I think is kind of a lot of people don't know at all, which a lot of people, unless you're some sort of invested, aren't really going to care that much that stuff's still happening. But that was one thing surprising for me, because I was like, there's still people that believe in it. And then I was like, there's still people that believe in it that were in the group before. And then like the more I've looked into it, the more I realized that like the story's still happening, and like it started way before 97 and it's continuing now way after 97. I mean, at this point we're further removed from it than the entire time the group was together. So like say they started in 75 to 97, 22 years, and now this is 26 years afterwards. So I mean, it's over 50 years, and like it's people are still talking about it. There's still, it still baffles the world over and over. There's still people that believe in it 20 something years later. I
mean, and like you said, like the documentaries were kind of your first foray into the group, and Kathy shared the same thing. And I always found that interesting, that these films that are not necessarily putting the group in the most positive of lights,
Yeah.
probably the last thing they expect that's going to happen is people are going to, watch their documentaries about the cults and come away thinking, well, actually, that all makes sense.
Yeah.
I think
Or
I'm going to try
or
and follow that,
for me it was like I thought there's something more to this that people still believe and still feel this strongly, and like the group was together for that long. And I was like, there's got to be something to this that I'm not understanding, or something I'm missing, or something that's being hidden from me, whatever the case might be. And that was, I think, the same way Kathy felt, was like, there's obviously something else to this, and I want to see, I want to hear what these people heard that made them believe. And I mean, it everyone's free to make their own decisions on it. I'm not trying to push it on anyone. Um, it's done wonders for my life and continues to. And T and Doe said that it would be that way. They said, whenever we're gone, people are going to say all kinds of things. We're going to be portrayed in this negative, awful light. People aren't going to understand what we're doing. People aren't going to understand what we did. But if it says something to you and you want to learn more, you can look at it and learn more.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've noticed with you, with Sawyer, with Kathy, is you guys are not pushy really at all.
Right.
I don't know how obvious it is, but um, I'm not part of the Heaven's Gate community insofar as I don't subscribe to the teachings
Right.
themselves. And yet I found it really poignant that as I drove from New Jersey to Savannah to make the first Heaven's Gate event, I was bombarded, particularly when I got down to Virginia, North Carolina, bombarded every mile with billboards basically advertising Jesus. Some of them
Yep.
not very friendly in their wording either, kind of
Yeah.
setting up ultimatums as I'm driving down the interstate.
Yeah.
And I found that really interesting because I felt probably um, more imposed upon by these billboards than
Yeah.
I did the whole time I was hanging out with you and Kathy and Sawyer. Like, I don't even think it really ever came up. Like, no one ever asked me or anyone else, like, so, like, are you cool? Like, are you part of the group? Like, there was never any like question like that. It almost
Mm.
seemed like it wasn't relevant. Like, it just seemed like from their perspective, it just seemed like we don't really seem to be that interested in getting people to believe what we're saying. We just
Yeah.
want to have the information for whatever's that's worth. And I mean, how many people do you think are out there now, or that there will be, like, as these documentaries keep flooding? Like, there's this new biopic supposed to come out in a couple of years, right, about T
Mm.
and Doe. Like, as this stuff keeps getting like pumped out, do you think it's reasonable to assume that there might be more people like yourself and like Kathy who kind of come to these teachings through that medium?
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. Um, it, I mean, that's the thing, is like you were saying with, you seeing the signs on the roadways and stuff. To me, if I remember right, Doe might have said something to this effect. If if something is that good, or if something is the truth, or if something is good or positive or whatever, you don't have to try to sell it to people.
Mm.
Like, you don't have to kind of push it on people and stuff like that. That's why they didn't, is like, we don't want to push this on you. We want this to be something that you accept by your own choice. And then there were plenty of times where people would say, a lot of the times naysayers, or like in the Inside Heaven's Gate books, they were like, can you tell us or show us something that can prove to us right now that you are what you say you are? And they're like, no, we don't want to, because that's not how we operate. Because if we did show you something, then you would believe just because of what we showed you. You wouldn't. That's sort of where faith comes in this belief system, is like, you have to make a choice to recognize it on your own. Like it shouldn't be forced. You shouldn't be there because you're scared of going to hell. You shouldn't be there because, you know, it's a country club or whatever. Like you should be there and believe it because you want to, and you have to seek it out yourself. And I think I'm getting a little off track here, but that was one thing I liked, is it's not pushy, it's not evangelistic really. They just say, hey, here's what we believe. If you're interested, here's material on how to look into it.
I
And
mean, a lot of, if they did any pushing, it seemed like they did a lot more pushing out. I mean, the
yeah,
way they lived their lives with celibacy and no smoking,
yeah,
no getting high, that's just not going to have mass appeal, you know?
right. I mean, at first they did because people were like, oh, it's a commune, it's a cult, whatever. But then like people wouldn't stop doing stuff like that. And they were like, okay, you're here for the wrong reasons. Instead of dragging everybody else down, just here's some money, here's a bus ticket, go back to whatever town you came from, because you obviously don't really want this. You're just in it for, whatever it might be. And I mean, throughout the entire class, they constantly removed people for just not making progress, or, you know, not being there for the right reasons, or your heart's not in it. And I mean, that to me, that's kind of unheard of for a cult, that anybody gets kicked out.
Kind
Like,
of bad business, I guess, from the,
yeah.
business end of being a cult.
I
Uh,
mean, for this, you were, one way they put it was that your life should be lived in a way that you are putting in an application for employment on the next level. So like you're trying to, instead of expecting T and Doe or whatever, or the next level, instead of expecting them to show everything to you and give you things to make you keep believing, instead of just sitting and waiting on something to happen, you're supposed to work towards it, and then you will see reward, sort of. It's something you got to seek in a way. I mean, it does kind of come to you, but it comes to you in like ways you don't expect, like, watching a documentary or chance encounters with people. Because for me, it went that way. It seemed like it was just a bunch of happenstance. Like I heard the recording of Doe singing opera. I asked one of my friends about it, a guy he's an older guy around here I look up to a lot with art and music. And he said, have you heard the story about that? This guy had the rights to these recordings and HBO used it without permission.
hmm.
I was like, no, what's up with that? And I went and looked it up, and that was Ben, who's the Heaven's Gate collector. And that's how we became involved. And then because of Ben, me and Sawyer became involved. And then I never thought I'd be able to meet Sawyer, but all of a sudden they randomly announced the first Graveface get together. And I was like, wow, this might be my only opportunity to ever see this man in vehicle. And
Yeah.
and like I said, my job literally miraculously opened up in such a way that I was able to go. And it was like all these sort of seemingly unrelated things, of like me printing the shirts, or me watching this documentary, or these various things that I did, seemed like it all just got me closer and closer to like the material, and Sawyer and other people that have been involved with the material. And I just had to be open enough to do it. And I thought about that with that first grave face trip, driving all that way alone. I was like, I could come up with a million reasons why I shouldn't do it,
Mm.
but I can come up with, a handful of reasons why I should. And I thought to myself, I was like, maybe this is an opportunity from the next level, that I can either choose to go out of my way and sacrifice my comfort and, money and perhaps my car and this and that and whatever else for this. Or I can just say, that's too hard, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to stay home. And, my entire life could have been different based on that decision. And,
Mm.
Because I mean, I was already pretty convinced by then, but like that first meeting that we went to really solidified me in it. And I decided to be more public about it and talk about it. Um, I still don't talk to just everybody I know about it because T and Doe kind of was like, "Hey, it's okay if you telling this to somebody is gonna, make it difficult at your job or this or that or whatever, then you don't have to,
Mhm.
unless you feel like this person could benefit from the information and it not like, make you lose your job."
Is that what kind of influenced your decision to come on here and chat um, about it, or did you feel like you had to get the green light from the next level, or
Um, I'd question myself a lot about it leading up to it. I did. I felt like I should talk about it for a couple different reasons. Um, I mean, with T and Doe not here or an older member not in vehicle, T and Doe said that in this age, in the time that we're in now, shortly after they've departed, one of the greatest things that we can do is to make the information available and give people the opportunity to choose. And I'm definitely not on here to proselytize anything, and I'm probably not doing a good job even if I was here for that. But I I wanted to show people in general that it's not what they probably think it is. And regardless of how they feel about it, invite people to take an honest look at it. And, you know, if you look at it and you think they're crazy and brainwashed and suicide doomsday cult, then that's totally fine with me at the end of the day. But I just like to give people the opportunity to think about it and look at it and see what it means to you. Because I mean, that's the only thing that T and Doe ever tried to do was just say, here's the information. You can have that. I'm going to walk away, and you can look at it if you want to and decide what you feel about it. And it doesn't make much of any difference to me personally if how other people respond to it. But I feel so strongly about it, and it's been such a joy in my life so far. Not always easy, but it's been, overwhelmingly positive for my life. And if there's anybody that can benefit from it, I would like for them to have that opportunity.
well, I am really glad that you did decide to come on and talk. Um, I enjoyed you know the time that we spent together at the first event. You know, everything about the event was endlessly fascinating and interesting, and I think having someone there for me to kind of um, reconvene with at various points throughout the
Yeah,
day was really cool. I hope that we continue to, grow in our friendship and continue to talk about, this subject and how it's impacted your life. And yeah, because like I said, it seems like this story is still being written with people kind of coming to these teachings,
yeah,
whether they're just interested, like myself, from like a scholarly perspective, or for you and Sawyer and Kathy from like a belief perspective. Um, there's something about this group speaks to people, and maybe it's hard to
yeah,
put a finger on exactly what that is, but it's clear that something something magnetizes people to this group. You
yeah.
know,
I've said
um,
before, if somebody wrote this and put it out as a fiction book, it'd be a bestseller.
yeah.
I
Um,
mean, it's the craziest story ever told in one way or another.
before we hop off, I wanted to give you a chance if you wanted to. I mean, you don't have to, but if you wanted to, I know you mentioned you have like a musical project. Is there any place anyone can go to if they're interested in hearing your stuff?
Um, I guess Instagram's the main place. I don't really like Facebook. I don't use Facebook for anything other than like keeping up with Sawyer and Kathy because that's practically all they use. But on Instagram, I am at kingdom_of_heaven_423. And that's pretty much the main way. And anybody can contact me there or whatever, see various things, ask me questions if you want to.
We covered a lot, but there's always more. But for now, do you think there's anything we left out that you wanted to address?
If for anybody that's interested in the material, the best place I would recommend to start, unless you're just super into reading, is the Beyond Human series. They're available on YouTube. Start from the beginning or just pick one randomly. They're not really written in like a direct narrative way most of the time, so they could stand alone. The book is available, Heaven's Gate, How and When It May Be Entered. You can read it in its entirety on the website, Heaven's Gate. It's also available on sacredtext.net, if I remember right. It's in its entirety there.
It's a great resource for a lot of texts, that one.
Yeah, it is. Sawyer has a book available. It's really valuable for first person perspective of it. It is a bit wordy and it is a bit thick, but it's it's
About 15
invaluable.
pounds,
Yeah. But that's available.
How many pages is it exactly? Do you know off the top of your head?
I can see it laying over there. It's huge. It'd have to be, I don't know, like 1,300, 1,500, something like that. Maybe more than that. It's huge. But yeah, I mean, the documentaries are pretty good. Cult of Cults, pretty fair. But if you ever get to looking past that, just watch Beyond Human on YouTube.
All right. Well, I want to thank you for coming on again, Alex. It was really great to see you again. I hope we'll talk again soon for sure. Yeah, and to everyone that was listening in, thanks for joining us. And hope to talk to you soon, Alex. Take care.
Thank you. See you, bud.